Up the road a bit further, on the right hand side as you'd be going back, there's a famine road, which was built during the time of the famine to provide relief. The labourers were paid at a penny a day. It was really a road to nowhere.
The little people.
The little people.
If you didn't cross on them, they wouldn't cross on you. There was one night a year that they used to put out milk for them.
The only border that's recognised is when Offaly and Laois are hurling or kicking football. After that, there's no border. The Slieve bloom is between the two of us.
The ancient roads of Laois and Offaly were the crossroads of Ireland. They brought travellers, invaders, armies, monks, vagabonds, and stories. A crossroad offers a place to pause, to decide in what direction we want to travel. But often we're so intent in taking the road to somewhere else that we don't stop and listen to the stories we might hear on this very spot. Stories of a people who can trace their oral history along very ancient pathways of the imagination perhaps, or pathways between the world of the present and the world of the past. I went in search of these stories when I spent some time among the people of County Laois and the Slieve Bloom Mountains in the Midlands of Ireland.
When I was a young fella, I used to ramble up to the Slieve Bloom Mountains to visit friends of mine who lived in Borna-Scott in Glenlitter Valley. And up the Glenlitter Valley, there's 1,437 acres in the valley, but up on the Laois border, there's part bog, and that's where the people used to cut their turf, harvest their turf. And I used to often go up with old John Heaney, a friend of ours, in the summertime when we'd be on away from school, and John was a great smoker, and he'd take out his pipe and he'd light it, and we were able to see down the valley and see off down the country, and he was a great man to tell the stories. But one day, it was a beautiful day, and he said to me, "Do you see that skiock off down there on the side of the hill?" And I said, I do, because I remarked it was the only white thorn that was in the whole valley. And he said a very interesting story in regard to that. He said because in that area there's another townsland joining that called the Crucheen. Previous to that I had asked somebody what Crucheen meant. They said it could have been the milking place, but John told a different story which I think could have been nearer to the fact. He said that the Crucheen were a tribe of people who lived in the Slieve Bloom Mountains, but John couldn't put a date on it like any of the old people. So he said hundreds of years ago, and they fished and they hunted deer. There's lots of deer in the area, and of course there's lots of fish in the rivers. And they used to, he said, they used to, when they'd be going into battle, used to go naked and used to rub this yellow clay into their bodies. And John pointed out the fact that just down there in the valley, he says, there's lots of that yellow clay there, still there. And he said that they were there for many, many years, and that another tribe came into the valley and challenged them, and there was a battle fought at where this white thorn, this skiock was, and that area there was called Coon na Cree. And before the battle started, the Crucheen people buried their treasure at under the white thorn, or near the white thorn, near the skiock, and they tied a wolfhound to guard the treasure. So when the battle was over, the Crucheen lost the battle, and the opposition, or the opposite forces, killed the hound, cut out his heart and put it on the white thorn. And that's, John said, that's why it was called Coon na Cree, the heart of the hound, or the hound's heart, which was a lovely story. And even a lot of the old people used to talk about this buried treasure up in the mountain. And it's only a few years ago, there was a treasure hunt here in Cadamstown, and a fellow from Tullamore said to me, isn't there a story about the treasure being buried up there in Glenlitter? But seemingly the story spread around. But the Crucheen, John's little story was the oral tradition. It was handed down from one generation to the other. And evidence of that was the horse worship. They worshipped the horse. And there you had the horseman of Knocknaman, you had Coppelbawn in the area, you had Tubernagopple, and you had the various place names, which still connects the fact that the Crucheen did exist. We always classed the old people as talking codology, you know, but still there's a bit of truth in it somewhere. Here we are at the giant's grave, what remains of it. There's 5 conglomerate stones scattered around here, and according to tradition and folklore, during the 1798 rebellion, a family of Daly's lived on my left here, and Johnny Daly took part in the 1798 rebellion and was involved in Wexford and Vinegar Hill. And when he came back, the local yeomen who were stationed in Clonaslee came along and they burnt Daly's house and they pulled down the stones as you can see them today. Over on my right here, just on the horizon, that's Spink Hill, and that's 1,087 feet above sea level. And it was there that the festival of Imbolc, the 1st of February, was held. And the old people used to say that all the people used to congregate there and used to kill a sheep and eat the sheep, and then they'd go down and they'd dance round, the young girls would dance round a standing stone in Cool Green, back here in this direction. And actually we have that standing stone in Cadamstown at the moment.
When I was a young lad, it would be before electricity, television, or even the wireless. And the ramblers are coming at night, and I always thought it was a story about spirits. They'd always get around to the spirits. Probably it was maybe to keep us in at night, because no matter what road was mentioned, there was always something on it. There was a man with no head of Hagee. There was a dog in a gullah on another road. And it went on, and it always got around to the spirits anyway.
Dan, one thing I noticed around this area, there's a lot of people with the same family names,
That's
aren't
right.
there?
Yeah, that's right, Nola, yeah. Now the ladies would be a very common name in Commerce. Reminds me now of a story I heard about this man. He was a man by the name of Paddy Delaney. And a remarkable thing about him was he had 2 very big feet. I often heard him saying that he was in the fair of Mount Rap one day, and it was the time the market house was there, and he went down the main street, around the market house and back down again. But there was 2 neighbours met. You see, Paddy's feet was so big they claimed that he wasn't able to turn around in a small area. And he went down, these 2 neighbours met, and they said, you didn't happen to see Paddy Delaney in town? I did, says the other one. He's gone down there to the market house to turn. But Paddy had 3 the finest daughters that you ever clapped an eye down upon. And they come down to Killinure Mass, always be a bit late, you see, the way everyone would see him. And the women would come in and they'd straighten themselves up in the porch and they'd walk up the chapel. Oh, you'd swear in your oath they were on the catwalk. And Paddy had come up behind them with the 2 big feet. They'd swear in your oath that he was on the bog. But anyway, this neighbour was talking to Paddy one day and he said to him, do you know what is, Paddy? I know of a snook farmer out in Kinney that might be interested in one of them girls of yours. Now, a snook farmer at the time was a man with a good farm ground, a lot of stock on the farm, and a few £3 in the bank. Well, says Paddy, begor, he says, bring him to the house some night and we'll soon find out. So the night was arranged, and they came along, and Paddy had a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses on the table. And the first thing they done, they attacked the whiskey. When they were halfway down in the bottle, and the hinges of the tongue got lubricated, the farmer says, where's these girls you're talking about, Paddy? The girl says, Paddy, come on now and I'll show you. And he go up and he walked into the parlour, and there was the 3 girls, and they're sitting on a couch in front of a roaring fire in the parlour. And now, says Paddy, you see that first girl there? We'll call her number 1. There's £100 going with that girl. And he says, that second girl there now, we'll call her number 2. There's £100 going with that girl. And that third girl, we'll call her number 3. There's £200 going with that girl. Well, how come, says the farmer, that there's £100 going with the first 2 and there's £200 going with the third girl? Well, now, says Paddy, I ain't going to be very fair with you. You'll want this girl to do a lot of physical work around the farm, such as milking cows and feeding calves and wheeling turf in the bog and making hay and all that, he said. And you'll need this girl to be strong. And is any fair to tell you that that third girl that I'm giving the £200 with has a shoulder down? And the farmer says, I suppose you wouldn't have ever one with the 2 shoulders down. As easy to know what he was after. Oh, come on, says Paddy, and we'll finish the whiskey, because it's not a wife that you're looking for, it's a cripple.
My name is Paddy Lowry. I come from a place called Folklore. It's a town's land just joining here. And I've lived here, around here all my life. I was born in 1919. So I saw a lot of summers and winters around here. So I'd like to tell you now about this well here. This is St. Finan's well. St. Finan is the patron saint of Kinnity. He came to Kinnity in the year 557. He founded his monastery there where the present Church of Ireland is. That is just about a mile across here, from here now. You might wonder why Finan's well is so far away from his monastery. Well, at that time, and even to the last century, the rule in all those monasteries was that there was no woman allowed into the cloisters, as those wells were used to baptize children, and naturally enough, where there's children, there's women, and they had to bring them. Every monastery had a well, apart from their domestic well for their household use. They had a well that was used as a baptismal well. And this one here in particular was a pagan well before that, because right over here is the hill of Knocknaman, where the ancient Celts held the festival of Bealtaine. And a well was very sacred to the Druids. It was a part of their ceremonies. But this well was definitely a pagan one. And it was taken over by the Christianity, of course. But there were several people, youngsters, baptized here. And now there was a huge ash tree growing right at the back of this well here, just out on the bank there. And there was 2 people lived up here in a house, just about 300 yards up here. And they considered that they'd cut down this tree. But whether they knew about the well or not, we don't know, or what their idea of cutting the tree was. But in any case, they started ahead, and this particular evening, and one of them looked up, and the next thing he saw the house on fire. Their dwelling house. And they dropped everything and run up, and no fire, no nothing. They began to think that it was some illusion, or some thought they were seeing things. Came back anyway and started to cut again, but they wasn't just well started till one of them looked up again and the house was on fire. But they went up again flying, no fire. As I said, they were seeing things, and came down anyway and started to cut the tree and cut it down. And went up to get their tea or whatever at the time, and the house was burned to the ground. Now that's a true story. because I saw the ruins of the house. It happened a couple of 100 years ago, but the ruins of the house was there up to very, very recently. And it was known by everybody around the place as the burned house, strangely enough. And everybody said that they couldn't have better luck cutting down the ash tree over the Saint's Well. So that's the tradition round here. So.
My name is Paddy Dooley. We're here in Neilstown, situated about 6 miles from Camras. I was born and reared in this house.
Would storytelling have been rich in the area?
Sure it would. Certainly when we were young, there was a great old lady here, Maggie Neal was her name, and she'd tell stories till the cows would come home. She'd shut the 2 eyes, sit by the fire, shut the 2 eyes, and we often as children went down there and listened to her for hours, you know. And she'd close the 2 eyes and she wouldn't open them for hours while she'd be telling these stories. She'd sit by the fire, there was an open hearth fire, and she'd sit there, she'd close the eyes, and she'd look sort of a steadfast, with the eyes closed, look into the hearth, never stir her head, and talk and talk and talk away. But she was a wonderful storyteller, and the pity is that so little of what she told us, we remember now, or has been recorded. At the moment we're standing in this liss here, which is in the townsland of Stoke. This is a very well preserved liss. In ancient times it was known as Liss na Gaelig Leinig, or the Liss of the Old Woman of Leinster. And just about 300 or 400 yards across the way in County Offaly, there was a liss which was known as Liss na Gaelig Moonig, or the Liss of the Old Woman of Munster, because in ancient times the provincial bounds between Leinster and Munster was just back down the road a wee bit here. The other list that I refer to was in the territory of Laois Cardle, which was part of the province of Munster, while this particular list here is in the province of Leinster. Now, this was a very important list in ancient times. In actual fact, it was what was known as a briam, or a hostel, and people who would be travelling from Leinster to Munster would stay overnight here before they would continue their journey on into Munster, because this was one of the passes from Leinster into Munster. This is referred to in the Book of Leinster, and the reference is as follows. It was harvest time here, and the time came to pay the labourers for their work at the harvest, and they were being paid either it was either partial payment or total payment, I don't know, but each of them was receiving a loaf of bread. And they were all coming up in the queue getting the loaf of bread, and this gentleman came along, and the old woman says to him, "You're getting no loaf." And he says, "Why?" And she said, "Because you were not one of the labourers at the harvest." And he said to her, "Do you know who I am?" She said, "No." "Well," he says, "I'm a messenger from the King of Munster, and if you do not give me a loaf, I will call on the warriors of Munster, and they'll come up here, and they'll devastate the place." But the old woman wasn't a bit frightened with this. She says, "Fair enough, you bring your warriors from Munster, but if you do, I'll have the warriors of Leinster here." And she started listing a whole list of names of the great warriors of Leinster. "I'll bring those here," she says, "and they'll soon put the fright on your warriors and send them back into Munster." And this continued on in the Book of Leinster for 5 or 6 pages, each one threatening the other with what they would do. And that is the reference that appears in the Book of Leinster, which I believe shows how important in ancient times this particular list was.
It was thought to be a fairy fort, wasn't it?
It was indeed. It was indeed thought to be a fairy fort, and we as children were always warned never to come in here. And we never came in. We were terrified of the place. And in particular at Christmas, sometimes, some years, you know, buried holly, would be very difficult to get. But there always seemed to be berries on the holly in here, always. But do you think we'd come in and get any of it? Not in the slightest. We'd be just terrified. So there was that fear among the older people of this place. And I suppose it's even to this day, you don't feel that comfortable around the place. In the summertime, you know, in very fine weather, which we don't seem to get now in the summers we have at the moment, you'd get what local people used to call fairy blasts. There were little mini whirlwinds, and they'd gather up tufts of hay and all that at the haymaking season. But the older people always told us that they always wound up here in this fort, and that what they were was fairy funerals, that they were burying one of their own. That's it. That was just it about what we were told about fairy blasts, that they always ended up here. There was a particular story which has come down. My great-grandmother came from a place called Upper Church, Drumban Upper Church in Tipperary, and she married into the county bounds, which is just behind us here, and in 1863. And there's this story told, and it has come down through the generations. She wasn't long here at the time, and she was in the kitchen, and suddenly this particular little individual appeared on the kitchen floor. And she was terrified, of course, but he said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to harm you in the slightest." And she said to him, "Where are you from?" "Oh," he says, "I'm over just across the road from the fairy fort. I'm over here," he says, "to tell you that within the next few days you're going to hear some bad news." With that he disappeared. And the story goes that within 2 days word came up from Drumban in Upper Church that her brother was after being killed in an accident with a horse. Now that story has come down through the generations. And I suppose insofar as it was my own great-grandmother was involved in it, I remember it and have very, very well, having it been told it on numerous occasions. So that's the big story about this particular fort that has come down in the generations.
How do you feel about being in it now?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, when I get out of it, I'll be happier. It's a very peaceful place, though, that has to be said, on a lovely evening like this.
It's a strange place. Paddy, when did you discover that you had an ability to divine?
About 50 years ago. A fella showed me how to do a diviner. I didn't even know there was such a thing out. And I said, you either have it or you haven't it. You can find actually metal objects or the like as well with this thing. But some people use L-shaped wires that hold them like that and they pass in across one another. They are useful too, but the hazel switch is supposed to be the best. The old druids were, in the ancient times, were experts at that. That's how they were able to find ley lines. You know, these are magnetic lines across the country. There are a good few of those around here, this area. A house would be built on a ley line. And that's common to all over Europe, where there's a ley line. And long ago in ancient times, when they were building monasteries and even castles and these things, they always built them on a ley line. There was energy or power attached to it. So you know, and if you were living in a house that was built directly over one of those, which often happened, people that say that it was built on a fairy pass. Well, the fairy pass was a ley line, and it would definitely affect your health. Or if it was a cattle shed was built on it, it would affect the cattle as well. It'd be the very same as you were living directly under a high tension line, electric line. Very same. To have the same effect on you. And you know, you get bad health or whatever and that type of thing. That was the sort of a record.
My name is Eileen Ahern. I lived in this area for over 50 years. And At the moment, we're sitting beside the lake in Grantstown, a beautiful lake surrounded by trees and beautiful lilies, water lilies. At the moment, I'm looking at them right across from here. Well, the legends of the lake and of Grantstown. Years gone by, there was a house here in this area where we are at the moment. And there was a woman, and she had 4 children, and at times were very bad. But one evening, this old woman came along, and she asked her for some utensil. Now, she didn't want to give the utensil, but finally she gave it to her. And the old woman went on down, delighted with her utensil. And the next morning, when the lady got up, outside the door was the utensil full of porridge for her children. And that went on for a good few evenings. And the old woman used to say to her, now you're not to look after me when I leave here. And she promised faithfully that she wouldn't. So finally, the old lady that used to borrow the utensil said to her, she really wanted a drink of water. But the woman said, no, she says, I have no water for you now. And the old woman says, I'll be finishing up. I won't be calling here anymore. And she said, don't look after me when I move from here. She was a little bit crafty, and she said to herself, I'll watch her and see where she's going. So she watched, and the woman went along, and there was a huge big cover. And she saw the old woman lift the cover and disappear down. When the old lady went down, she said, you'll have plenty of water, she says, in a short time. It's the legend that all the houses went down when the old lady lifted the lid. This opened out and all the houses went down, and that's how it is called Grantstown Lake. There's supposed to be no bottom to this lake, but there must be a bottom if there are houses in it.
This is an old red sandstone, as all of the Slieve looms are made of sandstone. But this is a stone which possibly come in the Ice Age, since it is also standing. But with the other stones in it, it came from the side of a river. But also the sandstone in the Slieve loom is redder in colour, and this is a whiter sandstone than the sandstone of the Slieve looms. The stone itself would be formed somewhere over 350 million years ago. The other white stones that you can see is jasper stones. They are a much older stone, but locally within the Slieve looms and possibly all over Ireland, they were considered to be sacred or precious stones. Since they were white, they were regarded to be, they call them God stones, the ones like those. Smaller ones like this would be probably called God's eyes, because they were so bright, probably from the shape of your eyes and the sight of them. They thought they were very lucky also. Also, those stones are very much older and probably the oldest stones in Ireland, since they already had gone through an ice age before that time, because you know when a stone goes through the ice age, it is rounded from the rolling around in the water and the sands. I'm going to tell you a story about Gregory Costigan in the end of the 1600s. Gregory and his family were evicted from the Pike of Rishal. They went back into the courts to recover their land and did not succeed. It's like taking the devil to hell, to hold the court in hell. They did not succeed. Within 2 years, 2 of the brothers were shot. Their names was Gregory, John, Florence, and Lawrence. Gregory survived in the Slieve looms for around 20 years after that. On the night in question, which I am going to talk about, he was drinking in a sheebeen back in Glencundra with some of the people who he thought were his friends. One of those included his nephew and his godchild, Sean Garr. Sean Garr had got into trouble with the English, and since there was a price on Gregory's head of around 50 pounds, Sean was interested in the money, but he was also interested in his own freedom, which he was guaranteed from the English. On the night in question, he went up and ordered a round of drinks from the lady in the sheebeen and told her to have one for himself. And she replied in Irish, which would be the spoken language in the area at the time, to drink it yourself. It'll be a very dear drink for you. That was to warn him off that he was in danger and who he was around. Since he was drunk, he did not see the danger that was around him. Some time after that, they left the sheebeen and they came across over Morton's Grove, which is there today, or Martin's Grove, it is, if you see it written down, Carraree, and back down the valley here above us. He was surrounded here just about 100 yards away from us, or a little more, put up a struggle, and he was brought down to the stone here in this region. He was beheaded over this stone, supposed to be over this stone, by either a slaying or a raping hook. One of the stories said that it was Sean Garr himself who done it. We do not know which it was. Gregory at that time would also have been a Robin Hood character in the district, and he was very, very well liked. He would have stayed in houses, and if he went away, and if the cow, which many people only had one cow or one goat, died, he would steal them off of some landlord within the region. He would bring it back and give it to the people on the site. They would have known probably a bit of where he come from, but wasn't too interested if they had food for themselves. But going from taking his head, it was put into a bag here, it was taken back down to the Rochelle, where it is presented at the door of Rochelle Lodge for to collect their money. And bringing it out of the bag, it was possibly recognised, the story varies slightly, but the one which seems to be the most true is that it was one of the coots were not there themselves, it was one of the wives. And when she seen the head dragged up by the hair out of the bag, she fainted. And she was supposed to be pregnant at the time, lost the child, and with the torment of it, the coots, that family, that particular part of the family, returned to England and never to come back again. To deal with the Sean Garr side of the story and the locals, as you know, Gregory was very, very well liked. So he was. And Sean Garr was taken back up the mountain. Had to be between two forest trees. If you look up at the Slieve looms now, under Ardairden, and there was a narrow track dug into the bog. He was turned upside down then and just pushed down into the bog and left there to think it over while he was dying.
My name is May Kelly. I live in a place called Cashel, about a mile and a half from Ballyroan. I was born here. My mother moved in January 1911 with 3 other children. And I was born in May of 1911. I have travelled a lot. I've been away working all my life. Enjoyed good health, had a good life, and I'm home now, living alone, and sleeping in the room I was born in. Not the same bed, of course, but in the very same position. And very proud of that. And
The story.
there is a little rock out in front of us, and as children we were told that the devil grabbed a bit from the rock of Cashel in Tipperary and got as far as here. Something frightened him and he dropped it, and hence the place is called Cashel. There are a good many families living in it, 20 or more in the Cashel area. Now the stones that were over in this field, we call them our white horses. But the story told by my grandmother was in penal days when people couldn't go to mass. They had secret masses, often at night. A priest would come, and this was well hidden from the road. And the farmer who owned the land at the time would never allow a horse, an implement, anyone within a good radius of it. Because I've picked potatoes in the field and we were never allowed to go out or step there. And those stones remained until another man came, bought the land, got a bulldozer and bulldozed all the rocks into the ditch. So they got the idea in Cashel of bringing them out and putting them up as a memorial to the Pass of the Plumes, but it puts them in the wrong place because Pass of the Plumes is a mile further down the road, much to my objection, especially as I was the oldest in the area. I refused to recognise it. It's still Cashel Cross to me, and Pass of the Plumes is down the way about a good mile. It's still called the Pass of the Plumes. It was very famous in its day.
My name is Frank Fogarty, a local historian. Here we are now today on a mound overlooking the Pass of the Plumes, or Barnagletty. In May 1599, Earl of Essex, sent over by Elizabeth, he landed here. He was sent with the biggest army to quell the O'Moores of Laois. There's a place down there in the hollow of the hill named Bournemouth. That was the first line of defence of the O'Moores. On the right, the army moved up as far as they could up the hills and met the O'Moores, and they had a lot of trouble getting through the thicket. The O'Moores were marvellous strategists. The man that was around them was a master of strategy. His name was Oni O'Moore. He ordered his troops back immediately, and while they were getting through the thicket, he attacked them in the rear guard, he attacked them on the flanks, both sides, and kept that up the whole way. He never met them direct. Essex had horses, had huge plumes up out of their heads. They were a big army, and they could show off in all directions. And in later years, after the battle, when these plumes are found, people found them and put them up in the rafters around in houses, and the place went by the name of the Pass of the Plumes, or Barnagletty, the Pass of the Feathers.
Well, my name is Jenny McGlynn, and I moved down here in 1961 when I got married. I had a family here. The house was a rambling house. My husband's and father-in-law's friends all came and had storytelling and sing songs, and had a great old time. We didn't have television, so that we were able to sit down and chat more than anybody else would. We didn't know what television was until I think it was 69 we got our first television. I lived here for 20 years, and then I got a home of my own downtown.
What kind of stories used they tell in this house here?
Well, there was all kinds of stories. There was ghost stories, fairy tales, possibly a little bit of war, about the wars. I can't. Well, there was stories of all kinds. all kinds of everything. Rearing children, the hardships we went through, all the rest. Everything to go with it, you know.
And there was one particular place that was very important in the stories, particularly the stories of the little people.
Yeah, the Roshini. It was the little people's place. Definitely it was the little people's place, you know. And gosh, we loved it. But unfortunately it was set on fire and it's not there anymore. But the little people did move. They made a rath for themselves, not too far away, you know. Just a little bit away from where they originally were. But they're still there.
And what was the atmosphere in the Roisin like?
Very peaceful. There was music heard. It was like an orchestra in the distance. You'd sit in and you'd enjoy it. Really relaxing. It was lovely. Providing you didn't touch any of the sticks. A man was herding his cattle one day and he took a bang from one of the trees to herd his cattle. And a little man came with a tail of one of his cattle and said, "Here's a lash for your stick." With the tail of one of the cattle. Because he had meddled on their place, you know.
And did people believe that it was
Oh, yeah.
dangerous to interfere?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. You don't meddle on the little people, they won't meddle on you. Be good to them and they'll be good to you. They used to leave out honey and cream outside their doors for the little people, so that there'd be prosperity in their homes. Right. Do harm on them, they'll do harm on you. Brides used to have to wear a patch of red with a darn needle in it so that she wouldn't be taken, because fairies had no blood, not like the human race.
Yeah.
If they saw blood, they'd run away. The same way with a baby. My mother-in-law used to say it's a changeling. If the child got too cross, it's a changeling. You should have put something red on it. My mother-in-law used to say, that one's taken.
What would they do about it?
The little people never cursed. And to change the child back, they used terrible language in the room where the child was. Effing and blinding, you know.
You believe in spirits, I suppose.
I do believe in spirits, yeah, I do. If you didn't, you couldn't believe in God.
And why do you think some people see them and some people don't?
And some are born to see, just like the prophets. They were able to see into the future. But it had to be done through a spirit of some kind, hadn't it? And then there's others that could see nothing.
The story about Black Tom was that he lived in Ballymacadam Castle. There was always the story that when he left the castle that he buried money somewhere around the vicinity of the castle.
But I often heard my mother saying that during the famine, that they used to get up at night with shotguns to guard the potatoes.
They were in finals, semi-finals for many, many years, and the crowd went to support the local lads and lassies. But it was always a curse, suppose, to be put on it, that a priest put it on it, that it'd be always a wet Sunday. But I'd remember some very fine Sundays.